Hello, this is Jared. I'm playing Oxygen Not Included, and this is Cycle 138, my Moonlet playthrough. So I'm starting off building an oxygen system. This is the second one, the asteroid. This is much further down. This area where they're working, obviously, is filled with carbon dioxide, very little oxygen here. So I'm going to make sure that when they're working here, they don't have to constantly leave to go to another area to get a bit of oxygen. They can actually generate it here. There's a little pocket of oxygen, so I'm going to tap into that. That'll allow them to not have to go up while they're building this system, hopefully get that oxygen diffuser running before that little bit of oxygen runs out. Over on the home world, I am starting to seal off this stable that's going to be for those Drecko creatures, but I'm going to ultimately, or initially rather, put in a pip so I can plant some mealwoods. I also want to get rid of all the other seeds because I want to make sure that the pip only picks up mealwood seeds. I can see that the oxygen diffuser has started to turn on, producing a little bit of oxygen in this area. So that's going to make it much easier to dig down. I'm building a conveyor loader, a sweeper, and a bin. I'm going to use this to be able to send a specific amount of material to the other world by teleportation. What I'm going to use this for is the ability to build a sweeper in the other world. So I'm going to send 200 kilograms of copper, so that engineer can go over, build a sweeper, and just make the process building or bringing back a copper ore easier. Now I'm wrangling some pips so I can have those sent to the new stable so that they can start planting some mealwood seeds. I would like to have 5 wild mealwood seeds in this stable, and I realize I have to move over to the left a little bit, and this light fixture is in the way, so I have to give one of the dupes the demolition skill so that they can get rid of that so I can build over that light fixture. I'm designing my stable such that I can get 3 mealwood, wild mealwood growing on each side of the different stations. So I'll have the shearing station and the grooming station. In order to get 9 mealwood plants here, I need to get the pip to plant them from left to right. So I'm going to construct ladders as temporary spots to indicate the pip not to plant a seed there and start on the far right side. Despite my efforts to try to get the dupes to avoid digging through water down this way, they're digging through water anyways. They're almost at the bottom, so it shouldn't make a difference. Lots of buried objects, so hopefully going to find some mealwood seeds. Here, I'm just watching the pip discover the first mealwood seed. I had those delivered in that bin. They're going to pick it up, and the only available spot is that far right. And as soon as they put it there, I'm going to destroy the ladder so that they'll move on to this next location and keep moving left that way. So having the dupes drop material in the conveyor loader is not the most efficient way. That's partially because it doesn't store a lot, so it limits how much the dupes can carry. Also, there's only one of them, so that the dupes are limited, especially when there's more than one dupe here, of being able to carry goods to it. So I'm going to have storage bin put in, and I'm going to have the sweeper set up so that it puts the stuff in the conveyor loader, and I'm going to disable the ability for the dupes to be able to actually use the conveyor loader directly. On the oil planetoid, the dupes have made it near the bottom, so now that they're here, I'm going to start digging out a lot of the buried objects and really hope that I finally found enough mealwood seeds in order to feed these dupes. Also going to look for efficiencies of transportation, so I think fire pole is probably going to be the first port of call for that effort. So I'm going to build a ladder that goes further down here, and I'm going to start the fire pole from the top and eventually have it so it goes almost, not necessarily the full way to the base, but at least halfway or more, so that as the dupes travel down, they can use a fire pole to go down. So I'm just having my dupes continue to work on the fire pole in cycle 142 on this base. I'm having my dupes destroy the 4th ladder to build, or for a pip to be able to plant the 4th wild mealwood seed. Doesn't take long for that seed to be planted by one of the pips, so I'm going to bring more seeds up in bins. And I might even need to look for various buried objects in the central biome, because I'm quite short mealwood seeds in both asteroids, it seems. I'm ending this cycle producing a little bit of refined carbon and ceramic, because those are materials that I'm going to need eventually coming up, and I'll finish off with building another gas reservoir to store the excessive carbon dioxide that's building up the bottom of my base. The first part of the fire pole system is installed, so I'm going to allow more oxygen to go through the space by digging out various different spots and destroying a few tiles. Next, I'm going to extend this ladder here that's in this middle temperate binome section. I'm going to finish this cycle off with producing a little bit of glass. That's going to allow me to have solar panels on various different asteroids I'm going to be traveling to in the future. Also, downing the priority of these clins. The sweeper's still going to hit them, but it's just going to prevent the dupes from actually manually loading coal or something like that. I much prefer the sweeper do all that work. Finally, I've got enough mealwood there, 8 seeds, so I can destroy this bin so one of the dupes can plant wild mealwood seed at that location, then continue on left from there. And then the very last thing is I'm just going to change the order of this. So I was storing some liquid water, but I wasn't actually putting it back into the system. So just destroying a pipe in the middle and then directing it around such that it'll store it and use the water that comes from there. Alright, so starting off this cycle, cleaning up some of the water that had spilled when I destroyed one of those pipes, rerouting where the pipes come out of those liquid reservoirs. And noticed a bit is on top of this polluted water, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. What this is actually preventing is the polluted water from turning into polluted oxygen in this area, so I don't have to clean it over here. I prefer just to do that in polluted water to oxygen system where it's more of a controlled state. Going to try to up the quality of life of the dupes on the oil asteroid. And I'm going to do that by initially building a washroom. I have a latrine on the rocket, but that's eventually going to run out of water. Also going to build a solar panel that's going to hopefully reduce the amount of time that the dupes are on the manual generators. I'm going to build a wire that connects this oxygen system to the mid part of the base, where I'll initially have it hooked up to a pump, but eventually other things as well. It's a sad state of affairs on my rocket construction. Oxygen's going right into the carbon dioxide and just being wasted out into space. So I'm happy to have stopped it, also quite frustrated that this problem existed. I also realized the reason for this is it was built one tile over to the left than the initial one, so I might actually scrap this whole area and just build it one more over on the right as it was before, just higher up to protect the solar panels. On the start of cycle 145, I'm having a rocket platform move one tile to the right, just so that it lines up with the ladder. Okay, so once that rocket platform is in place, I'm going to construct a carbon dioxide engine and build a Seafarer module. And with that Seafarer module, unlike the solo one, it will need a basic nosocone built on top of it. I'll finish off this cycle destroying another ladder so my pips can plant the 6 wild mealwood plant in this future stable for the Drecko critters. Starting the construction of 2 showers and a mini washroom for 2 dupes to be able to use while they're on this asteroid. In my newest stable, destroying another ladder so that my pips can plant yet another wild mealwood plant and almost complete that process. So now I'm going to bring in some automation with some lights, power that up. And this final bit might look a little strange. I'm building some mesh tiles. Ultimately what I want to do is minimize the amount of tiles at the bottom of the base, or this stable, and have a lot of tiles at the top part, because that's going to hold hydrogen. And when you have those these little Drecko creatures in hydrogen, their scales grow. They don't grow if they're in oxygen or anything else other than hydrogen. Finish off this cycle by completing the washroom, or at least the construction plans for the washroom. So it's going to have 2 sinks, 2 lavatories. I'll have a pump with, this has just a small amount of water. It'll just get me started, but that's got a pipe going to the input of all those buildings. For cycle 147, nothing too special. I'm just waiting for construction for the washroom and the stable to be completed. And then we'll be able to move on with some other things. I know that I'm going to want to do some Red Bolt refinement research in the future, so I'm just going to start some basic research to head towards that. So the washroom now has water being provided to it. Now I need to take the polluted water that's going as output and nominate a place to store that, and then connect that with pipes. The dupes may be choking while they're using this washroom because the oxygen level is very low. So I'm going to build a oxygen diffuser, connect that with power so that my dupes will have a little bit more oxygen. Also, I'm going to extend the solar array that's in this. I'm not going to go fully across because I don't have heavy watt wires, but enough just hopefully further reduce the amount of time the dupes are on the manual generator. Now that I'm going to be producing oxygen, I want that oxygen to be able to flow down. So I'm going to extend the airflow in the bottom temperate biome area underneath the washroom. So now we're at the point where a lot of critters in the hatchery have actually aspired naturally. And I've got 25,000 calories or more of meat, which is awesome. But it's going to go bad, which would be a sad thing. So I'm having a ladder and ultimately a fire pole next to it go further down to this really cold region. And that, along with something other than oxygen or polluted oxygen, such as carbon dioxide, would result in a place that meat or barbecue meat can be stored indefinitely without ever going bad. Having some critters expire naturally makes me think that perhaps some of the stables are a little bit more empty. And that is the case for a few of them. So I'm going to wrangle some pips and then have them brought up to those stables that are getting empty. One of which is that only has 1 of 3 pips. Just remembering now that I had the new stable have a higher priority to drop pips off. So pips aren't going into the stables they're supposed to. They're going to the new stable that doesn't need pips anymore because I already have 9 wild mealwood. So I'm going to disable that. Just noticed that the nature reserve was destroyed when I built a pipe through a ground tile. So just constructing a tile to reestablish that. Now I'm bringing Engineer back to the main world since the world that's over here doesn't have a lot of work left to do. I pretty much have all my copper ore I can need for a while. Got an omelet there. That actually reminds me, I haven't finished this system for building food storage in a frozen area. So given someone else the super digging skills, Engineer also has that skill, so that's excellent. The two of them will be able to dig through some of this material and get lower down. So what I want is an area with some ideally carbon dioxide and frozen zone. Now, I had minus 30 degree temperatures or so when I started. It's warmed up since then. Part of that is running that glass forge, which is heating up the area. The other is just general heat from the base. But anyway, that'll produce about minus 20 degrees, which is just about cool enough for some initial storage. Just realized that I've ignored the top left corner. I have some heavy watt wires that need to go in to actually take advantage of the 2 new solar panels that are there, and I can actually destroy the ones that are underneath. In the oil biome, I'm just going after some Dreckos and their eggs, and I'm going to put them into the rocket and send one of the dupes back with them so I can put them in this new stable and start to get some new material that I don't have access to in my home world. Since I'm doing that, I'm inspecting my new stable and realizing it's too big. Also had an air leak, so definitely going to take care of that. And once I have this done, I'm even going to pump in some hydrogen. So if I want one of the dupes to wrangle the Dreckos, I need one of them to have the critter wrangling skill. And they also need a drop-off point inside the rocket that's going to be specified to drop off those Drecko creatures. So I'll get 2 or 3 of those and perhaps some eggs in the bin, and then I'll be able to send this rocket home. This part here is not essential, but I'm going to destroy part of the rocket that I no longer need, because this is the only one that planetoid that I can land on that's in short distance away. So I just built a wall on top of the new Drecko stable, and that's 94 tiles big, which means I need to dig out 2 tiles to make it 96. Also going to bring in hydrogen. So hydrogen is the magic that allows those Drecko creatures to grow their scales. Otherwise, if you cut them off for some material, they won't grow back if they don't spend time in hydrogen. Just before I send this rocket off with the Dreckos and their eggs, I'm going to convert the drop-off point to a oxygen infuser, just to make sure whoever is flying that's going to have oxygen on their journey back home to the home world. Explorer, the dupe that has been left behind, their job is going to create a bin and dig out some iron ore and put it in that bin, because ultimately I want to easily put that back into a future rocket when it goes back home so I can get some iron ore back in my home base. So it did not take long for a rocket to get back, and now I'm specifying a drop-off point for the Drecko critters. So I've got 2 of those in the rocket. Also, I don't need to process any more eggs in the incubator. It's just not necessary for food anymore, which is really nice to get to this point. So I'm making a conveyor where I'll skip the incubation room with the incubator and hugger and all that, and just go right to the hatching area. So that tiny little room with tons and tons of critters. So I'm going to wrangle those 2 Dreckos. They'll go to the stable, but I'm going to bring the eggs here. So even though I don't need the incubator for food anymore necessarily, I'm going to still apply it to the Drecko eggs just to make sure I get some of those material a little bit early on, more Dreckos, the more of those scales and that I'm going to get. That's ultimately going to result in fiber reed, which I can make exosuits out of, and that'll help me explore some areas that are too hot. So I've created a bin on top of the base. I'm going to store some iron ore there. So 2 Dreckos have been dropped off in the stable. Cleaner there is grooming them, so that's going to increase the number of eggs that we'll be able to get, multiplying them. And some shearing is happening in the shearing machine. So that has created fiber reed. Now I can actually use fiber reed to finally get a exosuit, but I'm going to need the exosuit station to be able to do that. So build exosuit forge right here. I'm going to put a light with a sensor, so whoever is operating it will have light while they're building this. I'm going to put a bin right next to it. That's for the fiber reed, so that if materials need it, it can be dropped or put in from right next door. So now that the conveyor line doesn't drop eggs next to the incubator, I'm going to process the last eggs. So there's quite a few actually, pip eggs and other types of stonehatch eggs and that, but I'm going to process these. Those will be dropped up in the room above, and then I'll never process any eggs again, other than the Drecko eggs or perhaps the new critters. But for food purposes, I won't be incubating them after getting through this large set of eggs that has accumulated. Building some exosuits in the exosuit forge, and at the same time applying some lullaby effect on the last eggs that have come from the stables. Well, it's not the last eggs, but the last eggs that will go to the incubator room. Alright, so now that I've got the ability to build a safe air module, I can build a larger inside to a rocket. So it's going to give more living area. And I generally have 2 designs for these larger rockets. One is a ship that is good for living conditions, upping morale a little bit while dupes are traveling long distances. The other is utility rocket, which is what this one is. It's more designed to do 2 things in particular. One, store lots of liquid, specifically water. I want to bring a lot of water from this planetoid here to the oil planetoid. I also want to bring hot materials back to my home world. So in this corner here, I'm creating a vacuum, and that's where I'm going to store really hot, materials. So that could be hot lead, and other things like that. So I'm going to have already dumped some salt water trying to do this before, so I had salt water there, but I'm going to dump just a little bit of salt water on top of that second tile on the left. And that's going to allow the dupes to be able to access the material that's on the right side of it. So while that rocket's being built, I'm going over to the decilins and just telling the dupe that's there to upgrade the wires to heavy watt wires. Might as well not have them idle. Back on the rocket, I'm creating a vacuum down here, and I'm ultimately going to put a mesh tile. Because hot material, I need 2 vacuums. I need a vacuum to be underneath it so that material doesn't heat up the stuff it's sitting on, and I also want it to be in a vacuum where the material actually is. So I need 2 vacuum tiles for that. So on the top tile, just above that mesh tile, that is where I'm also going to drop off the hot material. I'm going to do that with a conveyor chute. And then I'll have a conveyor rail that goes in to be able to bring it in. So I'm going to build that now. And I have got a tiny piece of salt water on the left side. So the vacuum where that chute is right now is being maintained. It's still a vacuum, even though the dupes are exhaling carbon dioxide and the rest of the rocket at the moment. Also, I'm going to have an automated switch to turn the door on and off, because I don't want my dupes to always be able to access what's in that hot zone. And that may make sense later on when I get this thing operational. So also building a conveyor loader and a sweeper and a bin to be able to store those hot materials and then have it transported to that vacuum location. With the rest of the rocket, I'm just having water pipes and gas pipes that's going to store water and oxygen in the same way that I did with the same smaller rocket. And I'm going to give it power, because I'll need things like, well, I'll need to power the conveyor loader, but I'll have a oxygen diffuser and manual generator and battery. On the flipped asteroid, the artist has pretty much done their task, so bring them in the homeworld to do work here. So this is where water is going to be input. I'm going to store quite a bit of water, unlike the last rocket. So this water is not just for the lavatory while used, but it's actually going to be transported to the desolate lands so that I can get oil out of an oil well, as well as produce oxygen. So I'm going to have 3 tanks ultimately of that, and wrap it still around the rocket for additional support. I also have a liquid shutoff, because as this water is transported, I do not want it to be leaking out in space, because that would be extremely wasteful. So I'm having the automated switch to be able to turn it on and off, so that when I'm traveling in space I can turn it off, but when I land I can turn that thing on so that water can go into the new base. So now having the oxygen diffuser and a battery and a manual generator, so I can produce oxygen while traveling. So now I can see that the pipes are filled with water, but now I just have to wait for all 3 liquid reservoirs to be filled before I'm going to take off. So right now I'm going to start constructing a metal refinery. I'm going to destroy the glass forge, because I probably have enough glass for quite a while. I can always reconstruct it later. I'm not going to be able to operate this until I come back with some other materials, but I'll have it ready for the future. So the heavy wire has been upgraded in the Desolans, so now I'm building a spot to store the water that's going to be coming in from that rocket. And that'll be used for oxygen and an oil well primarily. Also just noticed that the Great Hall has been ruined because of a little bit of digging, so cutting this off so it becomes back to a great room. Okay, I've got 3 full tanks of water. Now I want to have the exosuits that I've created here be brought in, because that's going to be very useful in the other planetoid. So the system that produces oxygen from the fluid water, that only has a single vent. I'm now going to wrap that around various different parts. I'll just start with one place down further away, so that I can get more oxygen throughout the base rather than just emanating from that one spot. Okay, I haven't touched this area in a while. What I'm doing here is I'm building some insulation with ceramic. And this is where I'm going to have a bunch of steam turbines in the future once I've got plastic amongst other materials. So now that I've got a rocket that's filled with water, I've got several exosuits and a place to bring back really hot materials, it is time to send Doctor back to the Desolans, so that they can deliver that water and continue on with some of our projects. Just making sure Doctor takes off their mask after they've launched, and we'll go back to the Desolans. So that has a place to store the water, but I'm also going to build a pipe to go to the liquid reservoirs. Finally, every time a dupe takes off in a rocket, I need to reset these mask stations. So in the Desoland, I've installed a washroom, but I've also sent a mission back to my homeworld, taking with me several Dreckos. So that's awesome, because now I've got a stable in my homeworld for them, so they'll have more eggs multiply. But I also have a shearing station to be able to get the fiber reed from their scales. And when they evolve, I can even get some plastic. So I did that. I built a new rocket that is capable of storing several different liquid reservoirs. I've got those filled with water. I also have a ability to store really hot materials, which I'm going to use to send material back again when I travel back to my homeworld with some things like lead. Anyways, if you're curious to see what I'm going to do with this water and some of the other projects, like this video, subscribe, and see you in a future video.